attending. This is number 3 of our seminar program, a webinar program. And again, numbers are just going up, which is fantastic. For those of you who haven't been on the previous seminars, my name is Jon Tweed. I'm with AdvisorWise. I'm heading up the proposition. Relatively new. Again, for those of you not registered with us, please do register. Innovative platform, and we've got some great people running Jane Hanlon running the mortgage help desk, which I think in this climate is more important than ever. So moving on, I say just make sure we're all mics off for the time being. As previous, if you could just any questions, get them on the web chat, and we'll have time after. In our previous seminars, we've had a look at some of the blockages in the process, and there's a lot of work has been done within the from the lender's viewpoint for desktop valuations, as we looked at last week, and from the legal viewpoint, there's been a lot of work with the solicitors. Now, core to that has been the Equity Release Council. So I'm absolutely delighted to bring along Jim today, and Jim's extremely busy, so we really appreciate your time, Jim. Thanks for being here. I'm going to interrogate Jim a little bit and see where we go there. Jim has mentioned, just by the way, that his Wi-Fi has been playing up, so if we get the odd freeze, bear with it. Hopefully it'll be all right. He has got those hamsters running as fast as they can in the background on that wheel, so fingers crossed we'll all be okay. But welcome, Jim. Chief Executive of the Equity Release Council. A lot of work going on at the moment, Jim. So really appreciate you being here.
Brilliant. Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for sort of making the time to listen in. I know you're all incredibly busy, and I know this is actually a really testing time for everybody. John, ask away, ask the questions you want, and obviously I'll try and give the answers that you want, hopefully. Okay.
And just before we start, George, I've just picked up one of your messages. George said, if we, apart from Jim and myself, obviously, if we stopped our video, that reduces the bandwidth, so that might make sure we don't have any issues. So if you're all okay to drop out on the video, obviously you'll see myself and Jim. That may help as well. George, thanks very much for that. Really appreciate it. So, Jim, let's start with, everybody's aware of the Equity Release Council. We're all here. We're all part of, the lifetime mortgage industry. I'd be very keen on getting your view on what what does the council do? You've been there just under 2 years, so you come in with some fresh ideas. I'd be very interested in just understanding what the council does.
Well, I mean, let me start by explaining what the council is and actually why it's unique, in my opinion. For the first thing is, clearly, it is the representative body for equity release in the UK. But it's unusual because it's also a voluntary independent regulator for its members. It sets the standards, the protections, the safeguards that it expects its members to adhere to. And that's absolutely fundamental, because that gives confidence amongst consumers that equity release is safe and reliable. So it's massively important to underpin to the market. I suppose the final thing to sort of add to that is that it's an incredibly unusual association, because it doesn't just represent one body of advisors or players, if you can call it that, in the market. It represents the whole spread of everyone there, from advisors, solicitors, providers, surveyors, and also lenders and funders. So it's unique in the totality of where it is. And for the people who don't know, this builds up on a body of standards and best practice, which originally started with SHIP, and that we've evolved and taken over. So it's got a heritage of evolution of best practice for well over 20 years. So it's unique, and it's a very, very, very valuable association. It's very nimble, it's very focused on the sector. But actually answering, the first part of that question is really what I've been focusing on in the last 2 years since I took over as Chief Executive. And it's just marginally less than 2 years. I took over at the end of June 2018. And the first thing I did was really conducted a piece of work, a strategic review. And that's because I'm sort of incredibly keen to look at evidence and to find out people's perceptions. And that review meant that a whole series of stakeholders were engaged with, whether it was from government, senior politicians, policymakers, charities, members of our key boards, including the main board, and so forth and so on. And what we discovered from that was some fantastically insightful and valuable information. And the first thing was that our members thought that we were actually doing a very good job in the sense that over the time since Sector East Council had been around, we'd played actually a very strong role in addressing certain sort of core issues like this dreadful reputational overhang, which has followed the industry for many years now. And the council has been spending many years addressing and seeking to balance negative opinion with positive commentary about this new and evolving market, this very professional market. The second thing was that members wanted us to be the conscience of the industry. And that's an incredibly unusual thing to hear, that members actually wanted us to look at best practice and wanted us to make sure that we did the right things. But what members also wanted, though, was the recognition that as the industry was growing, it was no longer a £750 million a year market. It is really growing into a £4 billion a year market, which, you know, as we've noticed for the last years, it's been ticking along at that sort of level with the potential to grow much more. That what people wanted was us to professionalise the organisation, to evolve it further to reflect that. So based on that evidence, I've sort of set out a sort of clear strategy based on 4 pillars. And one was to evolve a greater proactive communication. The other one was to seek to evolve our standards. And from last year, members would have noticed that we'd gone through a major consultation, I think the second only since the council had started, really looking at how we transformed our standards into a much more outcomes-based standards. And we had a consultation with members, but also with the FCA, with the Treasury, with the Money and Pension Service. And that was really to start to really sort of flex our standards so that we could sort of evolve and develop them to reflect the market as it grows and the greater needs for those consumers who are seeking to engage for later life products. And of course, Sector East is a very valuable addition and a product to support people in that. With that also, clearly we've been seeking to add value to members and to professionalise the council. And so the way we've been seeking to do it through a range of initiatives. Obviously, the first thing we've done is we've set up a head office, our HQ in London. And the reason why we do that is it's a great place for members to come when they're in London, but also to hold events. Our last EGM took place there. But it's also great for the optics that people realise that the Sector East Council is a major contributor to the later life debate, and we deserve actually to be in the heart of the City of London, and we deserve to be taken seriously. Last year also, you may be aware that we went through a constitutional change, and we're evolving our board so that we have far greater firepower on our board, but also the optionality to identify if any skills are missing so that we can bring those skills and experience on board. So not prejudging what those committees and people might be looking at, is currently at the board we have a range of different interests and different expertise, but we don't have solicitors. So would that be a skill set which actually we might be able to co-opt onto the board? But it's, I think, an important evolution. Obviously, a core function of what I've been seeking to do is to sort of bring skill sets on board. So we've got experience, we can push the connections, and we can actually add more value for our members and reduce costs. And I think that's actually incredibly important. We've obviously sort of altered and refreshed our website. We've made it a much sort of clearer, easy to use facility. It's designed to help people in later life. It's got clearer navigation, it's got different navigation systems, and it's got multimedia facilities, which hopefully we can evolve over time to be one of those key portals for consumers who are really seeking to understand much more about our standards, about the products, about the services, and a great way to actually access our members. And it's a very valuable resource for that. During this time, I've been seeking to evolve our thought leadership, and we've done a huge amount of work in this space. And it's in a very considered way, because before I joined, I was speaking to a deputy finance editor of one of the major nationals, and they came back and said, well, look, the Actuaries Council, all it tells us is how the market's growing. And then the first response was, so where is the floor in the market? Because the hubristic nature of just continuously talking about positive numbers actually is a distraction from what I think is desperately important for this particular market, which is that equity release and property wealth play such an incredibly important role in addressing some of the major domestic issues of our time. And if you don't mind, I've got a couple of reports which we've been developing and putting out into the public domain. One looking at attitudes to bricks and mortar and how those have shifted over time, and more lately this year looking at pensions and property as one of the major assets which should be considered when people are looking at later life. I think it's terribly important to rebadge debates in those terms. And obviously on that basis, we've done a huge amount of work at reaching out to major stakeholders. Had you turned up to, and I hope that many of the people on the call today had the opportunity to turn up at our last parliamentary reception, we had vast numbers of people in the terrace room in the House of Commons. But importantly, we were spoken to by the Pensions Minister. We had contributions from the Shadow Financial Secretary, Annalise Dodds, who's now the Shadow Chancellor, and various meetings that we've had have involved, you know, a hosting from the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, attendance from regulators, members of the House of Lords, people from influential select committees, charities, advisors from Number 10. It's a sign of the fact that over this time through our activity, that we're really growing in stature, we're critically important to the major debates, and we're being heard. And for those people who are lucky enough to come to our first, I say lucky because obviously I'm an optimist and I'm enthusiastic. We hosted an event in the heart of Westminster with major speakers talking about a lot of the major issues where I believe that housing wealth can play a role, but also addressing a focus on vulnerability, on competency, on the future advice, and really put that into the heart of Westminster with major speakers. It's a sign that we're evolving the organisation to make sure that, you know, our voices are heard and we're being taken seriously as a key part of this huge, valuable debate we're taking part in. I won't go on any further. I mean, I'm sort of a bit frightened. It might sound like a list, but suffice to say, we are being listened to. The economic sector of the Treasury, you know, is a huge supporter of ours, and we've been able to sort of make modifications to legislation to support our industry in the last few years, whether it's through the Solvency II and the PRA, whether it's exemptions, the Leasehold Reform Act, or originally when the Single Financial Guidance Board was being put into place, now the Money and Pension Service. But hopefully that just gives a flavour of this huge amount of activity we're engaged in. And it's only just touching the surface because so much more activity is taking place under the bonnet, professionalising, organising, reaching out, developing newsletters, developing sort of greater sources of communication, all focused on bringing value to our members.
Thanks, Jim. Jim, just to add on to that, are you seeing over the last 2 years, there's obviously a heck of a lot of work going on. Are you seeing a change in how the government, and I know there's been a lot of work over the years, you know, trying to work with the government and trying to, you know, get more focus there. Are you seeing that changing? You know, are they more open over the, you know, are you seeing anything? And that's interesting for me to know because, again, coming in for 2 years, there's a, you know, relatively fresh pair of eyes.
I think increasingly there's a recognition that, you know, I've been very lucky. I've had the opportunity of working in government. I was an expert advisor in the DWP. And then latterly, before I joined the Actuaries Council, I was Deputy Director, Head of Research in the Westminster-based think tank.
Okay.
And it's just worth saying to people who are listening in, my entire career hasn't been in policy. I've spent 20 years working in the industry as a corporate affairs director in major organisations and partnership. I launched Just Retirement and Britannic Retirement Solutions, so obviously focused on industry and its growth. But there's a recognition now of these huge major societal issues, and a recognition that within that, property has increasingly an important role to play. And within that, because the industry is such an increasingly professionalised industry, there's a willingness to listen from us. But the important thing is that we communicate, as you'd expect any organisation representing such an important sector, reflecting it's a £4 billion a year market. So yes, there is a far greater willingness to listen to us, because there's a far greater recognition of how we can help support consumers. And that's critical. And also, we did a review. One of the first things I did do was I audited members of the House of Commons, what their particular concerns were with later life. And actually, uniformly across all parties at the high 60s was a need for safeguards and protections for people engaging in later life products. And of course, that's what we're about. That's at the heart of what we do. That's the who are you? Why are you relevant for this debate? And while we can talk about issues like that, we will be taken seriously.
Good, thank you very much. Just one final one on that before I move on. So the reports you've highlighted may be of interest to your members. So any council members can get access to that online, or are they available?
Yes, absolutely. They're online. If you go on the website and look through, there's a member section, there's a consumer section. But the consumer section will have all of our press releases, all of the reports which are designed for consumers to see. So you can find those there. You can find our latest spring reports and obviously our Q1 figures as well. We're going to evolve and keep on developing our website. So it's going to be one of those key portals where hopefully we can develop over time with multimedia, an opportunity for all consumers, all members to look at the big debates. To get all that information that my members need to develop their businesses too.
Fantastic. I don't think any of us could have foreseen without crystal ball 2020 and what it was going to bring. Tough times for everybody. We'll talk, and I'll just park the legal changes for a sec. So we'll talk about that in a moment. What other plans have you been bringing in? And I'm probably on the hoof to an extent, but what plans are you having to bring in for COVID, the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, obviously it was a wholly unprecedented event. Actually, when I do think that we were hosting the Treasury Summit just a few working days before lockdown, it's quite shocking how much the world has changed. I mean, the first thing to say is obviously making sure we were resilient as an association for our members, that we were open for business, and we are open for business. We've been able to use a virtual structure to make sure those key functions our members want are open and running. Also been working flat out, trying to work out what's happening to our members, what's happening on the ground, what issues are important to you, how can we support you? And obviously, we can of course talk about that. So critical work we did about keeping the market open with legal advice. But having actually gathered information, we went to feed straight into the major institutions which impact on decision making, which might have a macro impact on our sector. So we started some gathering information about trends in the market, products, and 101 different things that you would expect us as a responsible organisation doing on behalf. And so we've been feeding that on a weekly basis through to the Bank of England. And there's a residential property forum which disseminates critical information about the residential market across government. And David Burrows, our chairman, was able to sit in at the last meeting, which was incredibly helpful, just briefing the industry, people who make decisions about our modifications, about what we're seeking to do to address the major issues of our day. I'm in regular contact with the FCA. They're obviously, we work very closely with them as a very proactive and an excellent regulator in a time of crisis. Just talking to them about the trends, what we're seeing, the modifications, They were helping us, supporting us with sort of insights and guidance and best practice. And of course, at this time, we deal with our Treasury, our sponsor departments, and of course, major trade associations, regulators, professional bodies. But through this time, we've been really working flat out, making sure that we're delivering on all those elements in our business plan which can support our industry and what we can. When we put together, obviously, the legal solution, we were able to introduce for the first time a new webinar looking at what that meant. And we're still pushing ahead, trying to make sure that when the lockdown ends, we're enough on the front foot and able to really evolve this market quickly. So classic examples, we're looking at piloting the work for the competency framework, which I know that a lot of, certainly my members, I'm sure have heard about ad nauseum, but how do we make sure that new advisors, new solicitors to this market are able to work it away with the competency and familiarity around products, around advice, around the major issues which will help them to having a very fulfilling time in this market, making sure that we're in a position to evolve our advisor guide, very generously sponsored by Pure, which is a really, really helpful sort of a piece of work which helps people when they set their businesses up. And of course, these are new reports so that people realize what we can do. I mean, and why actually this is such an important solution for people. We're looking at another report on long-term care later on. But of course, at the heart of it, we're seeking to find new ways of offering value, new interactive solutions, so that if we can't bring people together, how do we engage them in a meaningful, interactive way? So we're working flat out. We're trying to find out what's happening on the ground. We're looking to our members to tell us, not just things which are a huge risk to your business, but also sharing best practice. How can we transfer that across? And of course, at this time, we're seeing remarkable adaptability by our industry as everyone is pushing together to try and enable consumers to have the option to choose equity release at this time. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah. So moving on from there, Jim, thank you very much. The legal changes to process have been well documented, and I think there's been some positive moves there to keep the market going. A big part of that for you surely must have been the change to the mandatory face-to-face requirement. So just talk us through the challenges of that, coming from the council perspective.
Well, when you actually talk to people who don't actually understand the industry, but you say actually one of our safeguards is face-to-face legal advice, and we're talking about an aging population and safe distancing, there's that look of horror in their face. And I look at this with particular fascination because I used to be a former lawyer myself, a tax and trust lawyer. So I place a huge premium on that particular safeguard that we offer. But obviously the debate is very simple. How do you make sure consumers are offered the safeguards and protections so they're protected as they enter into this contract, while at the same time recognizing that this has to be balanced against issues with social distancing, with lockdown. And we found ourselves again in this luxurious position because as an association which looks across all the elements in the value chain, we were able to bring all the constituent parts of all the expertise, all the different skills from across our industry to look at this issue, as well as we were just incredibly lucky at the time to also be sort of looking very much on how we evolve the role and focus of solicitors within the council, with a working group which was really had representation of solicitors that offered 60 to 70% of all equity release transaction advice in the UK. And through that, we were able to broker a solution which we felt balanced the particular needs of safeguards for consumers, which lawyers were happy with, while at the same time enabled us to keep open. So we were just incredibly lucky, to actually be in that position and to have the willingness and that proactive willingness to actually find a solution. I mean, the two things which for me were extraordinary were the fact that everyone was prepared to come together to try and broker a solution around our standards, realizing how important our standards were. It sort of cut through. It was all about protecting the consumer. And it was also the communication we're actually able to sort of share across different groups. And I thought that was just obviously incredibly busy. It was very stressful. But it was marvelous that we were actually able to find a solution which would work for people at this time and keep us relevant. Those were the sorts of issues we were dealing with, but we were just lucky to be in that position. And of course, to have this very positive can-do attitude from the industry, reflecting what the industry is. I mean, it's adaptable. I mean, the extraordinary thing was, if you look at what a complex sale actually releases, one would imagine this would be one of the areas which really couldn't modify or adapt its behaviors to actually find a solution, given that we've got solicitors, they need valuations and desktops right at the beginning, all the way through advisor contact and all those complex interactions, including with the solicitor. But actually, bizarrely, it's our sector has been showing this extraordinary galvanizing ability to be able to find a solution. I mean, it's remarkable.
So, thanks. So at the end of lockdown, sorry, a bit contentious this one then. So at the end of lockdown, will this have proven that we actually don't need face-to-face advice on the legal process?
Well, absolutely not. And I'll say this because for us, it's a temporary modification. Absolutely, it's been kept under review. Chris Pond, chairman of our standards board, absolutely on top of it, looking at what's happening. And the reason why is that, you know, what we've put in is the very best alternative we can find. It's an onerous process. It has mandatory contact points. It's deliberately trying to find more contact points to help the customer to really sort of make sure they're satisfied with the process, but also that the solicitor is satisfied that what we're hoping is in place and what we want to see is there. So it's a much more onerous process, which it has to be, and many more options for people to sort of default or come out of it. I'm a great believer in face-to-face advice. You know, the virtual world is obviously a far better world than it could have been 20 years ago, but nothing really actually gets over the ability for somebody who's qualified and expert to have that quicker face looking at people. And of course, if you remember that solicitors under the Mental Capacity Act have the ability to determine whether somebody has capacity. And you can actually work out very, very quickly if things aren't quite as you'd wish them to be. So I do think that's a safeguard that we will all want to be in place. And I think it's a really important safeguard. It shouldn't just be for equity release, given the vulnerability of the audiences we're talking about. I personally would love to see a number of the safeguards and our protections now just starting to move across to other later life products, because at the heart of a safe market are these incredibly resilient and I think valuable safeguards and protections we offer.
Thanks, Jim. Just looking at the Q1 figures have been just released. What can we read into those, and what, from your viewpoint, what's your thoughts on where we are with that?
Well, I mean, just saying, two figures have come out recently. We've had our spring report, which looks at the second half of 2019, and then of course today our Q1 figures have come out. They give us quite a nice picture if you look across at them. Basically, we've seen last year that we're still maintaining historically high levels of sales of equity release. There's that hunger and appetite, despite the fact that last year was typified by huge uncertainty, political uncertainty, before Brexit, before obviously a general election. What we've seen this year is, again, when you've taken away that uncertainty, we've got a very robust market. And for the people who've seen the figures, we actually have a record Q1 figure. And typically this is the time of the year when sales are lesser at this point of the year, they pick up, certainly at far higher levels at Q4. So what we're seeing here is actually all the drivers which are going to underpin this incredibly important socially valuable market are there. You know, there's consumer need, There are these extraordinary products, greater optionality, high quality advisors, safeguards there, which are going to be driving, I think, a very robust market. But obviously we're in a completely different time now. We've got coronavirus. It's just a good indicator to me that when coronavirus ends and people get much more certainty over their lives and greater predictability how they can plan their lives, that we can actually look forward to these fundamentals driving a robust market forward for us.
Excellent, thank you. Let me finish on a perhaps a wide-ranging question, Jim. What's your hopes for the future? Probably professionally, you know, but.
Well, I mean, yes, well, I can't wait for lockdown to end.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, I think this is a most fantastically important market. I think property wealth has a huge role to play. I mean, we need to see, and I can't wait to see, I do expect to see the safe growth of this market going forward. That's the first thing. Second thing, I hate the dialogue around people in later life using their assets to benefit themselves. And it's basically explained as a confrontation between younger generations who are being denied access to finite assets. That couldn't be more wrong, because people in later life are valuable participants in our communities, either as taxpayers, workers, employers, employees, as carers, as volunteers. And when they choose to use those assets, the cascade of wealth across generations to support different generations is huge. They're fundamental in releasing assets for the building trade, obviously for the various needs that they have, but also in terms of the people to stimulate the economy in terms of leisure needs, in terms of investment. So I'd love to see that debate being addressed. But I suppose, as I alluded to before, what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see the safe market that we're growing for equity starting to expand. And by that, I mean, I'd love to see the standards and protections that we take as norm for actuaries starting to expand across into other later life products, into hybrids, into RIOs, because these are vulnerable communities of people. Why should they have less access to quality advice to actually help them to be aware they're making the right decisions? And a classic example for me is a RIO. It can't be beyond the ken of man, or certainly an actuary, to design a RIO product where the second life is protected with one of our standards around security of tenure. Being able to live in their property forever without the fear of repossession, I think would be a huge accelerant to that market. But I'd love to see it grow safely like equity release. And the reason I want it to grow safely like equity release is we've got a hard-won reputation here. And I want to make sure that when we're being defined as we are as a mainstream product, that other mainstream products also have the benefit of that approach and that rigor. And I do think as a result of that, you'll have a far greater, far more vibrant, interesting, and faster growing later life market.
Thanks, Jim. And is that a discussion that's, you know, is happening at a regulator level at the moment, or is that just something aspiration from the council's viewpoint?
Well, it's an aspiration. It's definitely an aspiration of mine. I'm afraid I'm going to be like the ancient mariner. Very soon I'm going to stop 1 in 3 and say, why can't we now start to be very serious about really growing the later life market professionally? We've seen huge growth in our market. Why not actually sort of help grow other markets? We've got the advisors here. We've got experts who can look at the complex interaction within actuaries. They're fantastically well placed to now grow massive high volume RIO markets and actually hybrids as well. That's a big focus for me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jim. We're pushing time, but I've got a couple of questions. If you'd be happy for me to ask you from George, do you feel there'd continue to be a need for specialist qualifications to provide equity release advice?
Yes, I do. I think that the actuaries advisor is one of an extraordinary, highly qualified advisor, so capable of looking at lots of different areas. I do think that our qualifications have to evolve. to take into account awareness of all the different product types, and certainly if anyone dealing in later life, to know when to actually hand off to find an equity release advisor who's qualified to advise not just on the product, but to the interaction on tax, inheritance, on benefits. But I'd love everyone to realise that equity release advisors are actually high caliber advisors. They're amongst the very best. And
do you think that'll be extended? Should it be extended to legal advisors? That's the follow-up question from George on that one.
Well, I mean, we're looking at the competency framework, and what we're seeking to do is we are looking for new entrants to the market to be competent. I'm not suggesting the lawyer isn't competent, but to have the skills and the insights and the training that we can all be satisfied that they're operating at the highest possible level and giving us the broadest coverage across the UK. In fact, I was just making reference to the solicitors panel. There's a working group, and we're trying to make sense of what is the right and the best focus for them, because there's no doubt in my mind, high caliber advisors, high caliber legal advisors deserve to be properly paid and rewarded, and will be sort of incredibly sought after as people want a trusted and reliable engagement.
Great. We come into the end. Just a quick question from Donovan. Should this type of advice, specialist advice, be delivered by advisors who have a wider remit in terms of qualifications?
Well, I mean, certainly
the qualification question is a big question, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the qualification is enormous. I mean, the London Institute in Banking and Finance is sort of evolving their qualifications right now. All we can do is we can meet with them, and we are meeting with various trade associations involved in later life, trying to make sense of what the later life market looks like, what knowledge people need, how we can take into account the various regulatory silos, the crossover and the grey areas, that actually, you know, an equity advisor is capable of providing that excellent service. I mean, the only thing we have to be aware of is the later life market is vast, and we can't ask our advisors to continuously sort of drown under sort of more learning and more different spaces. Otherwise, they really wouldn't have the chance to give the advice they need to. But we do have to find a way of making sure people have the competencies and the skill sets to really give that advice, and actually to hand off if it's not appropriate for us, or actually to hand to equity advisors if other people realize they don't have those skill sets.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the questions. David, you did make a comment on the RIOs, that obviously there's the affordability issue within that, which, yeah, there's a big piece. It's not as simple as just should a standard move from there to there. So, but David, very good point on the affordability side.
I'll just quickly come out. David's absolutely right. We'll have to look at RIOs and how they're designed. But affordability obviously is taking into account the risk of repossession. But if you remove that risk, then you have a different product.
Thank you very much. Jim Boyd, Every. Jim, thank you very much for your time. Every for attending today, really appreciated. Next week, I'm going to be interrogating one of the lenders, and we'll be having a chat with them about some of the specific products they're offering and perhaps where they can fit in this type of market. So please do come along to that. The other thing we'll be bringing on, we've been in talks to them about bringing an exclusive on via AdviseWise. So we'll be talking about that next week, next Thursday. But if you haven't registered, register with us. You know, I think there's a lot of good info out there. So you know, hopefully we can keep supplying that to you. The last thing I would say, we are partner up with Pure Retirement. Next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. We're doing the big equity release quiz. It'll be all things equity release in a quiz. So we really hope you can join us. I believe that we will send a link out to you. For everybody who registers, we'll be donating money to the British Red Cross. So come and join us. A bit of light-hearted, bit of fun. We hope you can join us. But there will be more information coming out on that. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time as usual. You know, so just look out for the next one. We'd love to see you next week. Jim, once again, thank you very much. I think it's been very, very useful. Thank you all.